Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. Morena.
Is this one live? It's open. Is it being streamed? Yes, it is. Right, we're good to go. Good morning.
I'm just going to go through the presentation. Bear with me a second. So this is a bit of a journey, a summary of a journey with those community engagement feedback that we received over the last phase, which was in February and March, as you all know. The last time that we came to this committee or workshop, we presented the outlines of the main comments and topics that we could actually see rising through the analysis. Today, we're drilling a little bit more down into the detailing of each of those summary feedback. So it's really a session to kind of provide an overview of our drilling exercise, to also outline how these will be taken on by our activity managers, business writers, proposals, writers as well, and also obviously an opportunity for you to ask any questions or review a little bit more the detail. I'm just going to briefly go over this, just a bit of a pat in the back to kind of summarize a little bit of what we achieved in a 4 or 5 weeks period and where all those comments are actually coming from. And then straight away into the feedback analysis itself. We had, as you know, we had multiple platforms to review, to receive those comments. Ones were in during committee events with those big boards and through sticky notes. Some were through social media, which was our online platform, and social pinpoint as well. Just to note that committee events and social pinpoints were actually platforms where you could actually localize the comments because of the format of this. Social media were mainly under Facebook. Through the analysis, we have actually distinguished, we're trying really to kind of start understanding, where each of those comments were located, either by the focus areas, where are the chapters within the future scenario, the interventions, which are the item and program of works that we were engaging the committee on, subtopics, which were a subjective categorization by our analysts as to what was actually the main theme of that particular comment, sentiments, which I will go over very quickly as to the support and support mix or a constructive kind of feedback, and the location, which only relates to the location of the intervention and not the location of the person who has provided the comment. A quick overview that you've already seen there, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Mainly the comments were relating to transport and that they were really to look into public transport and walking and cycling. The second stage was on economic development, which really with a predominance on the vibrancy of our town and the amenities provided in the town and villages. Growth housing in Papakangaa, which will go again into a bit more detail, really to do with the intensification and affordable housing in Papakangaa. I noted that there was a bit of surprise as to why the environment hadn't actually many comments. I think our feedback were that mainly a good alignment and a good support overall from the community on what the environmental chapters were outlining, and from the events, this is what we got, that the committee didn't really feel the need to comment particularly on those interventions because they were actually aligning quite well with what the priorities are in under that particular topic. Looking at the feedback, again, you have seen this before, but hasn't changed. Just to give it a bit more of a definition of how those were categorized, supportive and unsupportive, kind of straightforward. When we looked actually at the item of mixed, they were more, for example, comments that would say, I support the intensification, but I don't support 3-story high buildings in my area. And in opposition, the constructive supportive were more I support intensification, and I would like to retain the feel and identity of that location. So that's how really we try to kind of understand. So that's why you see actually a lot of constructive support. They were actually positive feedback, but asking for another layer of intent over that particular comment. Going back into the topic, I'm just going to go through them and pretty much ask actually if there is anything that you want to kind of drill down as well, because all the details is already on the slides. So not having to kind of repeat, but I thought I would actually leave that slide just to really kind of give you a little bit of an understanding of how those feedback summary slides were put together. A quick note on, so the first column being so we had divided for each topic into renoting what the interventions were for each of those chapters. So that was actually the first slide. And then you had the second and third slides that drilled down into the feedback itself, onto support and sentiment for each interventions. And then the third slide was on the locality of those interventions. And then the fourth slide, was the feedback summary slide, which provided again a recap on the Ahu'ake intervention, and then the indicative possible actions, which are indicative only at the stage of proposal actions that will that could be delivered at any kind of level. It's not just council to deliver, it could be done at a regional level as well. And probably some will need to wait actually for a bit more national direction as well. But they are all interventions who aim to deliver those Ahu'ake interventions. Sorry, I'm just actually mixing up my terminology now. And the last column being the locations where we received the most comment relating to that intervention. Okay, so with that, yes, I would. Yeah.
So through Madam Chair, the three comments I had. Firstly, about Ohopo and the growing that particular settlement. I noted that there were only 22 comments, really. So I'm just a bit nervous about that. Is there any plan to sort of try and get a bit broader feedback on the proposal than just,
I think we need to understand that, those feedbacks we really need to distinguish the quantity over the quality of those feedback. We don't always have the amount supporting for a change or not a change within Ahu'ake, but they sit so much at a high level that you would expect actually another level of work to go back to Ohopo when it comes to deciding how the committee because we don't go to this level of details. What we know for Ohopo, which was quite a surprise from the engagement, was that during that day at the Memorial Hall, like all the residents that were there actually understood and mentioned out loud that they did believe that Ohopo's growth was inevitable. And their really comment was relating to how council will actually manage this inevitability over time. So I think that's something that will need to be drilled down over time. For the Ahu'ake perspective, the intention is the resident seems to be accepting this inevitability, and therefore the program of works coming from this is to kind of understand how we can best manage this with them.
Oh, that's great to get that extra detail, but I just really like some care taken when the next set of work is started with that community, that it isn't sort of put forward as inevitable or this is going to happen, how we're going to do it. I mean, I do think it needs to be care taken to bring on board those people that might not have engaged with Ahu'ake, have no idea, because it is a massive change for that community. That's all right.
And I mean, just to remember as well that the scope of Ahu'ake is to allow for those interventions to actually be seen by the committee and be responded to by the committee. The next step of work is outside the scope of it, which is the implementation stage for Ahuaki. And that goes into that level of how do we actually master plan for this whole growth area from Rokuiha, the airport, and including Ohopo. And when this master planning kind of program of works starts or begin or is approved or decided on, this is where that discussion needs to actually occur.
Yeah, okay. And then the second point was around the environment sector. Because there was general agreement, I guess, that people liked what they saw, so they didn't really comment on it. But I'm just not sure where the environment strategy is sitting, because I haven't heard anything like, is that going to be superseded now by the climate change work, or is it, are we going to have an environment strategy, or I'd just like that clarified.
Through the chair, I don't think that there's a definitive decision on that yet. As you're aware, we've had the KPMG internal audit with recommendations in respect of climate change. There is a improvement plan that is required to be developed and presented to the Audit and Risk Committee at the beginning of June. So that will be commenced. Part of that will be consideration as to the status of the environment strategy, climate change strategy, and the policy. So that work has been happening. But we have just hit pause whilst the improvement plan is developed and we engage with elected members.
Yeah, I'm just a bit alarmed that it's going to the Audit and Risk Committee, which isn't a full committee of council.
The improvement plan, the climate change improvement plan.
But that would be the committee that might endorse or otherwise what happens to the environment plan. I mean, I would have thought that would be something that a committee of the full council should have input into.
So sorry, I'll jump in there. So it's really only going to the Audit and Risk Committee, and as Kirsty said, in regard to the improvement plan. So bearing in mind this was an internal audit review that gave us a bunch of recommendations. The normal practice for any of those internal audit reviews is for the Audit and Risk Committee to look at the improvement plan and agree to that. So that aspect I think is quite rightly in ARC territory, but in terms of other aspects of this, yes, so I mean there absolutely needs to be full engagement and decision making by elected members. That this is just management of a response to an internal audit review.
Oh yeah, okay, that's a relief to hear. Thank you. And then the last question I had, I think it's in the cultural sector section, because now I've lost it in here. It was to do with access to the lake, improvements around Lake Karapiro, actually. Yeah, that's page 23 of our slides. Because my understanding was we had a workshop about that, and in fact it's something I've been banging on about, that access points actually should, and improving our recreational assets around water and our assets should actually be wider than Lake Karapiro. Yeah, and so I was a bit worried to see that only covered around Lake Karapiro. Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical that we're looking at, I suppose, the critical role that water and green spaces with water in them play with our community's well-being, and that we do really need to have good access to them and the appropriate facilities. And there's a dire lack of them for the Waipa River and things like that. And I know we have some for our peat lakes, but a lot of our publicly accessible peat lakes now could do with a lot of improvement too.
I acknowledge this, and that is a follow-up from what we discussed actually earlier on about the intervention that you found actually an imbalance between actually the east and the west of it. Just to kind of note that the connection that you refer to are probably not highlighted in the same chapter. They will be highlighted in the transport chapter when we look at the rural cycleway improvements, which discuss the link between Pirongia, Naroto, Ohopo, and Tiawamutu, and seeking for actually additional opportunities around Tepahu and Karapiro as well. So you're right, there is actually an overlap there, and there is an intent actually for those connection to occur. I think that it's just that we've set them up in two different kind of chapter there. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, well, I'll have to work out how best to get that communicated so that
Yes.
people can see the dots being joined up. Yeah.
And I suppose that's what really the special plan will be doing, right? It just at the stage, everything is going to come together in that final kind of project where people can actually see, it won't be just an idea about transport. It will be an idea about connection. And it doesn't matter if it goes into a cultural connection, it will be about connection. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll jump in. Sorry, I had my hand up. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the, and it's really interesting, isn't it, to see all of these indicative possible actions coming out. It just makes me wonder how we're going to afford the whole list of those, even if it is over 30 years, but let's hope that they can be achieved. I'd like particularly to talk about the transport and three waters and the public transport improvements and strategic transport projects. And I reflect on the work that's going on in parallel to this under Cambridge Connections, and particularly in the public transport improvements. It's only advocating for frequent public transport between Hamilton and the main centres and not talking about internal public transport. And that is in the modelling within Cambridge Connections. It's showing that there's not as much intercity travel as we previously thought, and a lot more intra-town travel. So is it because there was an assumption that public transport, internal public transport, was going to be developed?
They were two different scopes. So the Cambridge Connection is really about Cambridge. Remember that Ahuake is again still on the district kind of level. And we only looking at the feedback that were provided based on the intervention that were brought to the communities. And we didn't really receive any feedback as to internal location public transport as such, because we didn't ask.
That surprises me, because being at a number of them, I'd actually heard that there was the need for internal public transport. So I wonder why that never came through. It's interesting, but also the need, when we talk about projects, the third bridge eventually, and I'm not talking about building it tomorrow on the next 10 years, whatever. But again, the Cambridge Connections determines and accepts the need for a third bridge, or another bridge, sorry. Let's not say whether it's a third one or replacement one or whatever. But that's coming through quite strongly. And it's certainly coming through on feedback that I'm hearing within the community. And I heard at those feedback sessions. So I'm wondering why neither of those two came through into Ahuake.
I think again, I've just to go back on the scope of engagement was relating to the intervention that were posed during the committee engagement feedback. So there is a lot of comments that were actually provided through that were out of scope of the Ahuake, which are not presented here because we're presenting feedback which is related to the content of Ahuake. When it comes to the Cambridge Connection scope of work, that is a piece of information that we received from the feedback that we could provide that project team and for them to understand the level of support and non-support into their scope of work. But when it comes to Ahuake and the scope of our engagement and the scope of response, we're just reporting back on what we heard relating to those interventions.
Okay, so when the Cambridge Connections report comes through in September, and we know that it's delayed a little bit, let's say it comes through, and there are certain recommendations that are included in that report, will they then be absorbed within Ahuake going forward?
There is a level detail of Cambridge Connection that will be at the time that we go for approval with Ahuaki. There is a level of details of a lot of work currently underway with including the Cambridge Connection, also the plan changes and all that. That would be recaptured. Yeah.
If I can just through the chair add to that, we're not working in silos. We're working in collaboration with activity managers, business case writers and staff across the organisation. So there is an ongoing dialogue across multiple work streams. So Vanessa has worked closely with the transport team who are leading Cambridge Connections, and that information has been flowing both ways. That will remain as we further progress the development of Ahuaki. And as you're aware, there's another public engagement process, a formal consultation process that will be undertaken prior to the adoption of this plan.
Okay. I'm not sure that that addresses my particular question that I asked. I know that you're in communication with the other work groups. When those other work groups come out with their defined document or plan or strategy, then those aspects will be included in Ahuaki. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Like a lot of other work.
No,
currently
I'm saying not
underway.
only
Yeah.
Cambridge Connections, but a lot of the other things. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
As I said, I didn't want to have to repeat everything. So the last actually slide being about this alignment with the LTP. We presented those findings to business case writers and activity managers on the 28th of April. Following this workshop today, I will be sending through the detailing of that presentation and the master spreadsheet for each of one of the staff to actually be able to access the detail. In there, it is to note that this LTP is really kicking off the implementation of Ahuaki. There is a strong alignment and there is reassurance through those activity managers and those business case writers that their business case is already in alignment with Ahuaki. And obviously from 2737, we anticipate that the entire implementation setup will be in place to provide more direction to that next round of LTP.
Through the chair, just to, I guess, highlight where to from here and when we will next engage with elected members. So you're aware following an earlier workshop session that we are looking at coming back to you seeking endorsement of a revision to our programme of work and to incorporate an enhanced community participation process as our next step. So we will have a formal report to an additional Strategic Planning and Policy Committee meeting on the 30th of May.
So just on page 6, it really underpins the importance of community engagement and those community events, right? When you compare the feedback compared to electronic means. So I think, I know it was a tough haul, but certainly reaped dividends in terms of getting out there. So well done, great work. Gary.
Hey, Wishabone. I really have to thank and congratulate the team for the huge number of meetings that they've personally attended. A lot of it in weekends and after hours. And I think that the main point that's made is that with a standard consultative process, we tend to put out a statement of proposal, call for submissions, give folks in 20 days to make a submission, come in here. And it really, I think it disengages people, the statutory process. So very good, I think, to have engaged on this process and taken our time to get feedback from the community and therefore we'll feed back to them before we finalise this plan. So wonderful process, but overwhelming thanks to the team that's doing this.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'd like to congratulate you both as well, and well, as a whole massive big team. But I remember, Vanessa, you coming to the Royal Tours a couple of years ago too, so it's been a really long process, and overwhelming feedback from the smaller communities was, it was amazing that that you guys went to them, we went to them in those rural areas rather than just going to Cambridge and Te Awamutu type of thing. And so, yeah, well done, because you have worked really hard, and it's been a long process in those rural tours, as I said. So, well done. Yeah.
Just like to add, we'll have a crack here, but yeah, to you both as well for leading it up. But also, what was noticeable is just all your staff, Gary. You know, you obviously engaged them to come along because they gave up, you know, I'd call out of work time to come along. So as an elected member, but just as a community member, it was absolutely impressive to see the commitment in behind you, in behind the sort of leads. So in education, it hardly ever happens in government or local government, but I'd like to give you a big pucky, which is a clap.
Did you get the interpretation, Roger?
I understood that.
No, thank you, ladies. So on to our next workshop item is the gambling policy issues and options. Just a moment.
Madam Chair, just quickly, I'm involved in the RSA. Do I have a conflict of interest in deemed in this, or can I participate? We do have a class 4 gambling. I'm actually a member of the executive board. Yeah, I can leave. I've got a funeral to go to. Yeah, I just thought I'd better raise that up. We didn't have a formal session.
So Wayne, I'll pass this one over to you. Ta-da! Ta-da! You can stop. You can start. You need to keep your microphones and stuff on. Welcome.
And welcome to the team as well. So this is the gambling policy review, and you've been circulated a copy of an overarching report, a social impact assessment, and a presentation. So we tried to bundle it all up for you and give you some early warning of the information. So you should all have all of that in Diligent. The report is on page 33 that I'm reading on Diligent. And that, as I say, provides a bit of an executive summary about what we're seeking from you here today, which is really feedback and endorsement of the social impact assessment of gambling in the Waipawa district, and provide some direction on this policy review. Statutorily, we've got to have a gambling policy, as all territorial authorities do, and our policy is due for a review. They're due for a review every 3 years. And ideally, and credit to the team and Mika for preparing the social impact assessment too. It provides some really good background information for elected members.
Just jump in with a question there, Wayne. Was this report, the social impact assessment, prepared in-house?
Yes.
Yeah, can I just say it's one of the best reports I've ever read. That was first rate. The depth and the richness of research in there. I was like, man, someone's done this from central government. So thanks.
Thank you very much for that feedback. And I'm sure Nick's going to be impressed with that. So the gambling policy, as I say, requires territorial authorities to adopt a policy on Class 4 gambling machines and gambling venues. The policy must cover the matters related to whether a Class 4 gambling venue can be established in the district, where they may be located, a number of gaming machines per venue. The policy may include relocation provisions. As I say, it's reviewed every 3 years, and we also review the racing industry, which requires council to adopt a board venue policy. The policy must include whether or not new board venues may be established and where they may be located. So we would do that review at the same time. So just turning to the presentation, and you'll find that page 99, I think, on your reports, diligent, and it's on the screen. So all I'm going to do is just highlight just an overview. So just, I guess, as I say, just presenting the key points of the gambling situation policy. I've sort of outlined that. We have some guest speakers here to help provide and inform the elected members, and also seeking direction with policy review. So the three groups that we have for our guests from Problem Gambling Foundation, Christy and Kay, and Petty, I think. They're over there. Yes. And the Gaming Machine Association of New Zealand, so Jared right there. And we have Department of Internal Affairs, Sonia and Neve online. So they will have an opportunity to speak, and we're just going to give them 5 minutes each to talk to elected members on their particular positions in relation to the gaming policy. So that's me. I'll just hand over perhaps now to Carl, just take you through some of the mechanics of the policy.
Right. Excellent. Right, Morena Koto. So I guess this is your agenda as such. So we'll have a quick look at what policies can and can't cover, so the scope, what our current policy says, and then we'll hand over to our guest speakers, and then come back to you to look at some of the policy options and have a bit of discussion around the direction you see the review taking. So Class 4 venue policy. So I guess the first thing to just clarify there is when we're talking about Class 4 venues, we're talking about gaming machines, basically. So any premises that is operating gaming machines is a Class 4 venue. And the first decision's made for you. You have to have a policy around these. So it's just about deciding how you apply that going forward. So policy must cover where or if and where Class 4 gaming machines are going to be located within the district. And then you've got some options around whether you want to prescribe a maximum number of gaming machines for those venues and a relocation policy. So that's premises moving from one location to another and how that's managed locally. And we also have the TAB venue policy. So TAB effectively is the sports betting type situation. So again, must have a policy. And at this point in time, those two policies are combined into one for Waipa. Obviously, the subject matter is related, so it's made sense to have them in one policy. So again, the policy must cover if new venues can be located in the district and where they're going to be. So the current policy has an absolute cap of 232 machines. So I'll come back shortly in terms of the different types of caps, but at the moment, that's the total number of gaming machines that can be allocated. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the total number operating. So we've got one premises, for example, that's closed for renovation, so their machines are not operating. We've got one premises that is operating slightly less than what they've been allocated, but those are our machines, and at the moment, they are all technically allocated. We do allow relocations under the current policy, and there's a requirement that a class 4 venue has to have a purpose other than gambling. So all our class 4 venues will either be clubs or licensed premises, something of that nature is their primary purpose. And there's some locational requirements for the TABs around whether they adjoin schools, early childcare centres. So the Act itself's got some minimum standards as well that sit over and above the policy. So there is a maximum for gaming, how many gaming machines a business can have, 18 if they were in place before the current Act was came into force, 9 if they came in after that. So when we look at our list of premises in our district, we still have some that have been long established and have 18 machines. Then we have a significant portion that have 9. And I think we've got one who might have some strange number like 4, effectively making up the balance of what was available at the time when they applied. We do allow mergers, provided there's no more than 30 gaming machines involved. And we do prescribe location controls on where those venues can be located within the district. So the relocation policies, I've touched on that, allowing venues to move. There's some controls around that in terms of what happens to their conditions, the total number of machines, the society that's controlling those machines. And the other aspect of that some people don't sort of think about is that there is an opportunity for premises to move to locations that may be more desirable than where they were set up. So there is some other options there. But the sinking lid, there's no provision of a sinking lid in that. So if the premise moves, the number of machines available stays the same. They don't lose them. So caps, like I said at the start, absolute cap of 232 for us. Compared to not having a cap, obviously that reduces the number of gaming machines that you might have available and the number of venues and obviously the related expenditure. Research isn't sort of clear around whether that in itself directly reduces the number of problem gamblers. We might have some comments on that a little bit later. And it's the intermediate step between obviously having no cap and having a sinking lid. Yep.
Actually, 232
machines, yeah. I think at the moment they're spread across 18 premises or something like that. 15 premises, yeah.
So that's later, it's not a business.
No, it's individual machines. Okay, so the next sort of cap that you can consider is a per capita cap, which I guess is what it says on the tin, that you have X number of gaming machines per portion of the population. That is shown to reduce the number of gaming machines and venues. And there's evidence to suggest that it increases the use of intervention services in that space. But again, it's not necessarily a sinking lid situation. And the sinking lid, so that's effectively as premises close or relocate or whatever it may be, the machines that are allocated to them are effectively given up and they don't become available for anyone else to take. So at the moment, if someone closes a business, those machines remain available for someone else to take. The sinking lid, those machines are taken out of that total and it reverts to whatever the total is after those machines have been removed. And so obviously, as you'd expect, that would show that the number of machines and the number of expenditure over time decreases. So that's the quick summary. So yeah, I'd like to hand over now to our guest speakers. Go to the next slide. There we go. So.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for welcoming us here today to talk about gambling and the future direction that you set for gambling across the district. So my name is Kay Christensen. I'm a policy advisor for the PGF group based in Hamilton, but living here in Cambridge. And my colleagues, Christy King, also Public Health and Policy Manager, and Peti Waka is our pōhiwa. And so we've collectively come together today because I think later in your question time, we can, provide just a little bit more scope about what's actually happening on the ground with gambling harm that is not reflected in the statistics, and then our recommendations for policy moving forward. So thank you again for your time. So we were asked to prepare 2 slides. One was around preparing some quickfire stats, and then the second slide is around our recommendation for policy options moving forward. So as you can see, we've had a fairly hefty spend across the Waipawa, a little over $10 million lost in 1 year to pokies. With that comes an associated harm, which may not and is not necessarily reflected in our statistics. We can talk a little bit more about what that harm looks like on the ground. So we've got approximately, this is just averaging out across your working pokies, about 45K per pokey a year, and your median income 35.5. So the pokey's making about close to 10 grand more than the median, than the person in the district. So, and with that comes an associated harm. Now we know that with the Ministry of Health research and data, only about 16% of people present for counselling or for support of any kind. So it's really underreported. But what we do have in the district, and Peti can talk more about this in question time, is we have 48 individuals that have self-excluded from venues across the Waipawa, and that's Cambridge and Te Awamutu and Kihikiki. And there's about 200 exclusions collectively coming from these 48 individuals. And this is a public health measure that they use to keep themselves safe. They may not necessarily present at counselling, but this is one measure that they use to keep themselves safe. So we have got a relative amount of harm, and also remembering that the Gambling Act classifies Class 4 as high risk, high turnover gambling, which is what your pokies are. So your Class 1 gambling might be a sweepstake that you would have on race day, or a rugby match or something like that, where there's not a lot of harm associated. Class 4, high risk, high turnover. And from an organisation that sees gambling harm on a daily basis, we're concerned about the harm coming from your pokies. So that's just a little bit of a quick fire kind of stats. We, as an organisation that sees harm on a daily basis, we continue to advocate that the adverse impacts far outweigh the benefits for gambling. So for us, we continue to recommend a sinking lid policy, strengthened with a no relocation and no club merger. So from our view, it is the best policy that aligns with the public health approach required through the Gambling Act. And when we talk about that public health approach, we're not just focused on this severe end of the gambling harm. This is about right from the beginning, where people are losing money, household income through participation in gambling, kids going to school without shoes and money because of gambling, right through to the societal costs for crime and fraud and all the other things that encompasses. So the public health approach takes care of that whole continuum, and not just this very tail end of the gambling that we so often hear about. There was one study done in 2021 by Irwin and colleagues that looked at the effectiveness of policy across New Zealand. It is only one study, but the results indicated that your absolute caps, your per capita caps, and your sinking lid are effective, with the sinking lid being the most effective of those 3 policies in reducing the problem gambling expenditure by 13%. Now, we've currently kind of got a bit of a trend with council, because this is probably about the 5th or 6th time now that you've reviewed this policy. So people are hearing more about it, and you're getting more in touch with, the harm that pokies can cause, even though they're not reflected necessarily in stats. And so what we're seeing now is a trend across councils adopting a more stringent policy in terms of protecting the health and wellbeing of their communities. So we have currently 33 out of 65 councils across New Zealand that has adopted a sinking lid. So those are my 2 slides, but I did actually forget in the beginning to acknowledge Mika for her work. When we first spoke with Mika, she didn't have a great knowledge around gambling, and it's resulted in this amazing report that's given you some really good information to consider as you move forward with your policy options, because it's not easy if we can't come to you and say, well, crikey, half of your population is suffering and this is what it's looking like. We can't do that. But through the question time with Christy and Petty, who's working on the ground, she knows what's going on, she sees what's going on, we may be able to fill in some of those gaps for you. So I think that's probably my 5 minutes. Okay, so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay.
Jared, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I'm Jared True. I represent the Gaming Machine Association of New Zealand. The association represents the vast majority of gaming machine societies. Our view is your policy that was adopted after a full public consultation process and after a lot of research and a lot of thinking is an excellent policy. It's a reasonable policy. There's been nothing new in the last 3 years. There's been no adverse stats, no adverse trend, which would indicate any sort of sudden change or move away from the status quo policy. Mika has done an excellent job with the report that's been done. If your legal requirement is to review the policy, and you're doing that just now, it's entirely within your rights to say, we'll review the policy, we're comfortable with the status quo and roll it over for another 3 years. Now, that would end the cost and the time for council involved in doing that. If you wanted to amend your policy in any way, that would require you to go through the full public consultation process, where we go out and have a full public consultation, we hear submitters and we then look to amend that policy. Gambling venue policies do tend to be popular, and thus they do tend to be lengthy hearings, time-consuming, expensive hearings. If we retain the current policy, we're not going to see any new venues or any new gaming machines. You are at your current cap. Retaining the current policy is not going to allow for any additional growth. If we look where your venues are currently located, you haven't got any venues in your very, very high deprivation areas, which is positive. If we look at the number of local presentations, so the 0800 helpline, the text line, the email service, and face-to-face counselling, they're funded through the Problem Gambling Levy, which generates over $20 million a year to provide those services and to promote those services. And every year, I've got the spreadsheet here for you, those service providers are required as part of their contract to report how many people come and see them, how many people bring up, how many people see face-to-face counsellors. And the best evidence on the Ministry of Health website is the number of interventions, excluding brief interventions. So a brief intervention is when you bump into someone in the supermarket or you just have a quick text or a chat to someone. We're talking about interventions which exclude those brief interventions. We're talking about where a person has a talk to a counsellor on the helpline or goes and has face-to-face counselling. Those numbers in the Waipa district are trending down. In the last full year that we have, only one new person from your district sought help from problem gambling. That trend doesn't indicate to me that we've now got a massive problem that justifies a sudden policy change from what is a reasonable balanced policy to something extreme like having a sinking lid, no relocations and no club mergers. If you look at your presentation stats compared to other councils of similar size, or look at Hamilton, their figures are in the tens or the hundreds. You had one person approach. That wouldn't suggest to me that there's a need for a sudden policy change. Nationally, the problem gambling rate is also very, very low. It's only 0.2% of the adult population. There is benefits that come from playing the machines. The machines are a form of entertainment. They also are used to raise money for community fundraising. We've had over $1.29 million in local community grants that have made. But importantly, there's also the other benefit that comes from the machines that's not shown up on those. Out of your 15 venues, 3 venues are club venues. We've got the Cambridge Kosi Club, the Tiamuru RSA, and the Waipa Workmen's Club. Those clubs make internal grants. They use the profits from their machines to provide services to their members and look after their members. So they don't make external grants as such. So the stats that you'll see in relation to the grants, the $1.2 million, $2.9 million, in addition to that, there is the benefit that comes from the clubs that use their own money internally. Also, what's not reported in that $1.29 million is the money that goes through the TAB. So the TAB in Cambridge, for example, has got gaming machines. It uses that money internally to support the racing industry. And of course, Waipa is a great benefactor from the racing industry. So there's, in addition to those external grants, is the clubs that get supported and the racing industry that gets supported. There's also the benefit that comes from national grants and regional grants. If we were to pay for an ambulance, $350,000 for ambulances, as we do, $350,000 for an ambulance to go to Te Awamutu, that would go to the St John's head office in Auckland, and the funding then gets allocated through to the Auckland pool, even though the ambulance would turn up here and benefit the local community. Also, the benefit from regional grants. Your schools, people in your community that play hockey would no doubt travel in and use the fantastic facilities at Hamilton Lake. Hamilton Lake's facilities get funded, and that goes into the Hamilton total, but those facilities are still available for people in the Waipa district to use, and they use them. There is absolutely no link between gaming machine numbers and problem gambling rates. The problem gambling rate has plateaued. We have seen our machine numbers over the last 10 years reduced by a quarter, reduced by 25%. 25% reduction in machines, problem gambling rate has plateaued. What we have seen, though, is when we do lose our physical machines, we've seen a massive spike in online gambling. And it was absolutely obvious in COVID. When all our physical venues were closed, all the online gambling went through the roof. And online gambling, it's lawful to participate. It's done with offshore providers. There's no regulation, no harm minimisation, no guarantee that if you win, you will actually get your money back. Your policy has a sensible relocation provision. The relocation is a harm minimisation tool. If you've got a venue that's in an unsuitable area, it allows it to relocate to a more desirable area. It also creates fairness in the event of a natural disaster or a fire, enables those venues to re-establish. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jared. Now we'll be hearing from Department of Internal Affairs as well. Or are they just...
Yeah.
We are? Oh, hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Niovi and I work within Regulatory Services Engagement Team, and my background is in gambling compliance, licensing and harm min practices.
Kia ora, my name is Sonia Christensen and I'm a senior gambling regulator with the Gambling Services, and I've been with the team for 5 years.
So our first slide shows how the gambling machine profit is spent. Really important to note that around 90% of what is physically put into the gambling machines is paid out at the venue by way of jackpots and wins. This diagram here shows that approximate 10% that we call, or that's called gaming machine profit, and how that is used for Class 4 venues. So this is what Jared was talking about, not clubs, societies, and how they distribute this part of their money, though some of it does apply to clubs. So what we see here is a minimum of our 40% of gaming machine profit used to make grants to communities, and the balance of that is used for duty, taxes, levies, venue payments, and operating costs for societies. As our role as regulator, part of our role as regulator means that we do venue inspections, we license societies and venues, and we do grant audits. So if we turn our mind to thinking about venue inspections, this includes us going to venues and going through a series of inspections, audits, questions with venue operators. It covers things like operational banking and cancelled credits, but we actually focus significantly on harm prevention and minimisation. And as part of our venue inspections, we look to see that venue operators are working to identify anybody that's showing signs of problem gambling. that or playing for extended periods of time, that they intervene with that player and offer help seeking information, and that they manage and support anybody who chooses to exclude themselves from gambling. We also look to see evidence-based logging and reporting so that we can see how they're running their business. This year, since February, we've undertaken 7 venue inspections in the Waipa area, and we've done 3 club visits to have a look at how the clubs, their current operating environment and how they're supporting their communities.
So licensing, part of our annual licensing renewal focuses on society's financial data. So we look to ensure a minimum return to the community by way of grants of 40% to authorised purposes. So society's authorised purpose forms part of their licence, and what guides grants can be made for. Society grant audits are also part of our regulatory work and are based on our risk assessments.
Thank you, Sonia. Moving to the next slide. What we want to say is that you know your communities best, and as part of our regulatory role, we're here to provide your TLA with data so you can make informed decisions to support your community. So we've talked about some of this data, but here's some specifics. So you're right, the GMP for the financial year ending 31/3/23 is 10.7 million, slightly up on the previous year. This slide below here, it comes from the DIA's granted site and shows the grants that have been made to Waipa for a full financial year for 2021, which is orange, and a part financial year from Jan to June for 2022. We expect the updated data to go up within the next 3 or 4 weeks for a full financial year for 2022. This shows that Waipa received a total of 1.772 million for the 2021 year and 481 to June to date. Jared mentioned this, it's all important to note that there's also national grants that are made. So national grants for the 2021 year amounted to 25 million. And so some of that, some of that would benefit your district. I don't know if you're aware, this site is operational on our webpage, and you can drill down and cut and dice the data in any way that you choose to look at it. Yeah, that's the data and the stats that we have to present to you for this thing. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies. I guess that means we move then into some question time. If elected members have any questions for any of the guests we have today, then Marcus first.
What is the classification for an underdeprived area? Because you said there was no pokies, and what was I'm sorry, I can't remember the wording on the slide.
Yeah, so I don't know who puts it together, but if you have a look on the Department of Internal Affairs website, it's broken down into very low deprivation, medium low, medium high, and very high. And the Department of Internal Affairs site will list where our venues are located. And there's absolutely none in very high deprivation areas. There's some in medium and medium to high areas. The trouble is that gaming venues tend to be in bars, and bars tend to be in the central business districts, and central business districts by their very nature tend to be high deprivation areas, because you look at the people that live there tend to be students or people in low income, people without vehicles, and the people that live there tend to have lower incomes. So as opposed to a suburb where you might have people with higher incomes and you wouldn't have a resource consent to have a bar established there.
Thank you. Yeah, Claire.
Thanks. I'd like to ask the Gambling Harm team. You said that you've got information that gives a fuller picture than what the statistics show of the harm that's caused, because at the moment we've heard that there's only been one additional person that's been seeking assistance, for problem gambling. I'd like to hear from you why you don't think that's an accurate figure of the actual harm that's occurring in our communities. Thanks.
I think we can, the three of us can probably contribute to that answer. So now we looked at the client intervention data for July 2022, 21 to 22, and we actually saw that there were 3 new ones. So there might have been an update that in between the time that we both looked at the data, but even so, it is a relatively low number. We know there's an underreporting, only 16% of people report. But in terms of what's actually happening on the ground, I think when we talk about the multi-venue exclusion and what people are doing, the gamblers actually doing to keep themselves safe, I think Petey might be able to provide a little bit more insight into that, as she is the one on the ground across our Midlands area.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koe mea, Susan, koutou katoa councillors. So in my public health role, I'm also the MVE coordinator for the region. What I can tell you about MVE is that it is a harm minimisation public health program and also a clinical intervention tool. So part of my role is to support people, gamblers, to self-exclude from venues. Sometimes there are specific venues that they want to exclude from. Other times it's a blanket. It often comes at a time where their gambling is out of control and they feel like there is no other resource other than to ban themselves. We are more likely to receive requests from people themselves, from community members, including this region, Waipa region, than from the venues themselves. The venues are required to, in their host responsibility, approach people that they see in there on a regular basis, often weekly, sometimes daily, exhibiting problem gambling behaviours. They are required to actually approach people and ask them, would you like some support? Do you think it's time to take a break? But there's not a lot of data to support that that approach is actually working. Quite often it's the gamblers who are seeking support through our services, through our helpline, our text, our email, our phone call, our 0800 number. And one is actually quite significant for the region because that one person felt so, to the breaking point where the person felt that the only thing that they could do for themselves was to self, and that is not an easy decision to make. It requires them to overcome the stigma and the shame that they are experiencing as a pokies gambler. And so my role is to support them through that process and to make sure that that is the right thing for them to do. And so for this region, that one person is actually quite significant. Yeah.
Can I just clarify the 3 versus 1 thing? So there's 3 people, including brief interventions. So 1 person that's actually had a proper counselling session, 2 people that have been at a very short chat. And I'm not saying there's only 1 problem gambler, but I'm saying if you look at the trend, and I can leave this with you, 2017-18, we had 10 interventions, 10 new people, then we went to 8, then we went to 3, then we went to 5, and now we're down to 1. So it's a downward trend in the people that are presenting, which suggests to me the current policy is working and there's no need for any sort of radical change.
Roger, then Mike, and then Marcus again.
Keep forgetting to press the button. A little bit of clarification. You mentioned an increase of 1. You said that it might be an increase of 3. So, but an increase of 1 on what base number?
So we're not talking an increase of 1. We're talking only 1 person in a whole year has picked up the phone and actually had a counselling session.
Yeah, there must be some who are on a program of assistance, help, support, that where their interaction continues for longer, and a year, or it might be 2 years, I don't know. because addiction is a.
So the data reports that. The data reports the number of new people in the year, which was one new person, and the total number of people that sought help. And that was 4. Only 4. And this is for all forms of gambling, not just gaming machine gambling. So this new one person could have had an internet problem, could have been a TAB problem, could have been a housing problem. We don't know. It's not even necessarily a person that had a problem with gaming machines.
So the other 4 people that you're talking about, they could have initially sought intervention going back previous year. Right. So there's only 4 or 5 or 6 within the intervention environment currently for gambling addiction.
So there's only 4 currently in the year that received any sort of help, either as part of an ongoing package, and out of those 4 people, 1 person was new.
4
in total.
4 on a supported program.
And included in that 4 was 1 new.
Yeah, I'm not trying to belittle.
That's for wipe.
And again, I'm not saying you just only have 4 or 1 problem gamblers. I'm just saying that the trend is very much a downward trend.
Okay, Jared, just correct me if I'm wrong with this logic. So gambling losses to pokies was 10.7 mil in Waipa. DIA tell us that 90% is being paid out. Therefore, some 100 mil is being put into pokies in Waipa each year, correct? Okay.
Well, it depends whether you count turnover. So it gets a little bit complicated because if I go to a bar with $20, I put $20 in and I win 15. I then spend the $15 and I win 10.
Yeah.
I then spend my $10 and I win 50. And then I gamble all that $50.
But my logic is still right.
They add up the 20, the 10, the 15, and the 50, and say I've spent $100, where I've walked in with $20, I've walked out with none.
Yep. Okay. It's a startlingly high number. It's higher than our rates take, which is big. Now, then my question is, you've reported, well, not you've reported, we haven't reported the gambling losses as a net figure. What about the wealth redistribution amongst people playing pokies? Because that's only part of the story. So I want to understand the sort of the payout regime. So for every, I want to drill down into these numbers a bit more, okay? So tell me about the wealth distribution of the people who put $100 million into these things in a year. What happens to them?
Well, they don't put $100 million into them. It's like my $20. They've walked in with the $20 and they walked out with 0. I haven't walked in with 100 and come out with 0 in my example. So it's $10 million that's been spent playing the machines. And those people that have spent that money have considered it their disposable income, their choice to spend it on their choice of entertainment.
Do you have any data on the wealth redistribution amongst those players? So it's not just a net figure of 10 million is lost?
No.
Okay, thanks.
That's interesting that it includes the reinvestment dollar as well, and not just the initial. So if there is a 90% payout or winnings, when you play, then it is assumed from that statement, and that if it includes a reinvestment, that in fact the initial dollar that's put in the machine is actually 10% of the total turnover that goes through the machines. So if the total turnover is 100 million, the initial investment could be down at 10 million. Is mine?
You lost me.
No, well, let me go back on that again. You say that the turnover on the machines includes all of those dollars that are reinvested from winnings, and of that total money put into the machines, then 10 million of that is the estimated.
Yeah, so we have 2 figures. We have the turnover through the machines, and the losses. So the turnover is effectively the 100 million, and the losses is the 10. So I walk into a bar with $100. I spend 100, I win 91. I spend 91, I get back 80. I spend 80. So that becomes a large number. But at the end of the day, if I lose all of that money, I've still only lost $100. I haven't effectively spent $900 because I've reinvested my winnings. Although I've won and reinvested it, it counts as turnover.
This is just reflecting on our client stories. It's never just $20, $100. There's an ATM in the venue or outside the venue. So it's more than, you're not just there for the $20. $20 goes away in like 5 minutes. So they go back out, they get a cash out and they reinvest. And the whole thing of, you know, if you put $1 in, you get 90 cents back. That's over the game cycle of a poker machine. And that has like 50 million different options. So you have to go through all of that to get your 90 cents back. So in the long term, it's not an investment for the punter. So they are making a net loss for them.
Marcus.
With my role with the liquor licensing, I noticed that there is the ATMs in the with the pokies. Who owns the ATMs? So who provides those? And like, should there be a policy around maybe excluding the ATMs from these areas and just making it so it's you know, I walk in with my $20, I've lost my $20, I'm not going to go to the ATM, which is probably going to charge me rip-off fees compared if I went to my Westpac bank and used the Westpac bank ATM to get $100.
So all the ATMs are pretty much owned by a company called Next ATMs. They supply the ATM and sometimes they provide the float as well for the ATM. There's a charge made, approximately $2. I think it's $2 or $2.50 per transaction on that, and that's shared between the venue and the ATM owners. There is currently new regulations that are, the Department of Internal Affairs will be able to tell us this, that are currently top secret, but Niobe might be able to shed some light on this regarding where ATMs can be located in venues, whether they must be in fact in line of sight from the staff, and rules regarding how many withdrawals are allowed. But Niobe will be able to enlighten us on the new regulations.
Yep, certainly. So the new regs haven't been gazetted yet, but there will be some changes. We're expecting some changes. Couple of things. ATMs cannot be in the gaming room. They need to be within line of sight, and many societies have policies around number of withdrawals and or dollars that can be withdrawn. Our expectation is the monitoring of people, and part of venue operators' roles and responsibilities is to manage people who may come up and get an FPOS, get some money, go back and gamble, may come back to get more, and we call it chasing losses. So if somebody goes in and gambles and comes back and gets some more money and goes back, there's interventions and conversations that are had at that time. So the guidance around monitoring people in ATMs is part of what we do when we look at venue inspections. So there's an expectation that gamblers are monitored for ATM use and chasing losses.
If you have a packed bar on a Friday night, how on earth are you going to expect the staff to be able to monitor under the Liquor Licensing Act 2012, the users coming up and buying drinks and stuff, and now you're also wanting them to monitor how many times people are walking up to an ATM as well?
So we expect the new regulations to actually put a limit on the number of ATM withdrawals and to require the staff to monitor that. And you're dead right that that's a difficult job. That's why we've got clever companies at the moment developing software that will record how many withdrawals you make, report that to the bar, and send an alert to the bar when the limit has been exceeded or when there's been a decline. So there's software in play to help.
Yeah, but
the ATMs would be quite capable of setting a limit to the number of times that a person goes to the ATM. Like if they could go, say, twice in an hour or twice in 24 hours or whatever. Technology is such that that could be built in.
Next ATMs are working on a program that's just brilliant. It's exactly like that. It sends an alert if there's been a decline. it sends an alert if the designated number of limits has been exceeded, whether that's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It also prints out with your ATM receipt effectively a problem gambling pamphlet as well. So it gives you information. The ATM has a compulsory sort of downtime while it's counting out your money, and on the screen comes up the problem gambling messages. So we're actually using the ATM as part of a harm minimisation tool.
Especially if you're charging $3 or $2 or $3 a transaction as well.
Well, that's actually the deterrent, right? Yeah.
But it's not a deterrent, and that's what we're trying to, I guess, the thing is the regulations or the amendments came through last year. It's not enacted right now, but the reason why Minister Tinetti reviewed the Class 4 amendments is because harm minimisation in venues are not great right now. And these technologies are awesome if we can get it in place, but they're not in place right now. So I guess in terms of council view, it's more of a public health approach in terms of thinking what is best for the community in terms of harm prevention, in lieu of the new harm regulations coming in place, in lieu of new technology coming in place. So that's what we're
talking about a policy for the next 3 years, though, and these regulations will be enforced very shortly, won't they, Niobe, and for the bulk of the following 3 years?
Jared, I think we have a question online there from Andrew Brown, one of our councillors who's in Canada right now.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Not so much a question. I think just the talk about turnover is a bit irrelevant. It's really the loss, the $10+ million that's disappearing from people who cannot afford it, going effectively to, well, I guess mainly the venues, but also to organisations and people that effectively tend to be much wealthier than the ones who are losing the money. So yeah, that's.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got a question. You've noted there, Jared, that there's an increase, that closure of physical venues results in an increase in online gambling. Have we got any data around increases of online gambling that's credible?
Oh, yeah, absolutely we do. And I provided some feedback through to Mika. The really clear sign is what we saw with COVID, with the level 4 lockdowns. When our physical venues were closed, we saw an instant 25-30% spike in online gambling. Boom, it just went from one form to another. And then as people have sort of got used to that, we've actually seen the online gambling space carry on and being a popular form of entertainment.
So just referring on to that. So during COVID lockdowns, obviously all venues were closed. So obviously people aren't going into Class 4 pokie venues because they're closed. And yes, lots of people went to online gambling, but the main form of that was My Lotto, so buying a lotto ticket. When we look at overseas offshore online gambling, which is like the online pokies, which are the most harmful, another harmful form of gambling, that in turn, yes, we're seeing an increase, but not to the point where the clients who are coming to our services across New Zealand, and not just ours, but other gambling harm services, 46% is still citing Class 4 gambling as the most harmful, as their primary gambling mode, and only 13% is classified as other, which includes overseas online gambling. So that gives you a distribution of harm.
I've got the numbers for you. So in financial year 2020, Sky City's got an online casino. Their revenue in 2020 was 10 million. Close out our venues, their revenue doubles, more than doubles, goes to 27.9 million, almost triples. We look at My Lotto, 2019, they had revenue of 227 million. That goes to 430 million in 2020 as a result of the lockdowns. So.
Okay, thank you for that.
Could I just, sorry, could I just add to that
last comment, because we really do have to move on.
Right. That council have no jurisdiction at the moment on online gambling. The debate here today is what are you going to do around your Class 4 policy moving forward? What council can do around online gambling is to continue to advocate for that stronger regulation. This is about protecting our community. It's easy to get lost in the, the she did, he did, how much did they lose, what went in, what came out. But at the end of the day, there is a significant spend across Waipa. We also wonder whether there's just maybe an underlying belief perhaps that wealth is a protector, and in this community it's not. We've got a significant spend. Class 4 gambling is high risk, high turnover. There is harm. We know it's not accurately reflected. We see it every day. And what council can do around that online gambling, as I say, is to continue to advocate for those stronger policies. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Mickey, did you have to finish, you had some slides to finish off the presentation for us? I'd like you to come forward and do that. Thank you. Thank you very much for your input today. It's been most enlightening. Thank you so much. And thank you to the people online who've just gone.
Clearly the experts, so thank you very much. So moving forwards, I just wanted to, I appreciate that no decisions can be made in this forum, but I would appreciate some direction going forward, sort of what you will envision the draft policy might entail. So so basically we have two options going forward. We can keep the current policy as is, or we can change it up a little bit. And there are a few main options that we have going forward. So I'll just sort of step you through each, and if there are any thoughts, feelings towards possibly including or excluding something, again, nothing set in stone, but just some direction would be appreciated. So for minimum standards, so that's reverting back to what the Act sets out. So that's the number of machines, location. Do you need me to go over it again, or do you? Yeah, sweet. So are there any particular thoughts about reverting to the minimum standards? Yeah. So you'd prefer to stay as is, as opposed to minimum standards? Cool. Okay. So currently we have a relocation policy. Is that something we feel we'd like to keep or remove at this stage? Happy with the relocation policy?
Because we do have controls where they can relocate to, because we've got those other measures about not locating close to schools and early childhood centres, and that would apply. So,
brilliant. Absolute caps. So again, currently we have an absolute cap. Currently, just as an example, we do have one of the venues relocating. So if we, that entails these machines that are currently out of circulation, just because they are being moved from location to location, they can come back into circulation.
Could I just ask a question about the relocation thing? So one thing that was highlighted in the material that you prepared was, there's maps about where the high deprivation areas are. It'd be great if there was a control on a relocation that they couldn't go into a very high deprivation area. But from the discussion that we had, it doesn't sound like that would be effective anyway, that the CBD, just the nature of how the statistics are calculated, it makes a CBD a high deprivation area, doesn't it? So can you see any improvements on the controls we have around the relocation that might make it more difficult to locate it in an area where there'd be a lot of vulnerable people, I think, yeah.
I can definitely look into that. But yeah, just to clarify around that deprivation, that would probably change with the census. There is potential. So where that deprivation index comes from, it is actually explained. Sorry, I don't have access to the same documents you do, but in the report, it's on page 21, explains where that comes from, and that's from a study that Auckland University, Otago did, and they draw in several indicators, and it is all explained there in a graph if you want to look closer. But yeah, when all those stats will be updated, will most likely be with the census, so there is a chance that we can say don't move into deprivation index or area, and then that changes with the new data that comes in.
Okay, thanks.
Just clarify a point. If we have a relocation of an existing license that has 18 machines, that they're moving into a new venue, which is after the date that the 18 dropped to 9, my understanding is they would still be able to have the 18 because they take forward the terms of their license to have 18.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Yeah, that is my understanding. Correct me if it's wrong, but yeah, I believe that is the case.
Good. Okay, thank you. And is the TAB facility, is that a different policy?
Yes, so it is essentially two, but in WIPO they have been combined, so they sit in the same document. So there is, that is, the next question is absolute caps for both. So you can have one for the class 4. Currently we have one TAB venue in the WIPO, and we do have, say, around how many of those, if new venues are allowed to be established and how.
So we currently, and I'm talking about Cambridge here, we have one racing facility, which we actually have 2 racing facilities, because we've got the Harness Racing Club and we've got the Cambridge Thoroughbred Racing venue, which is basically under development. We've just installed an all-weather track. Sometime in the future, they'll be installing greater facilities. Would they be excluded from the provision of gaming machine licensing?
Yes, they sit under they sit under the Racing Industry Act, not the Gambling Act. So currently, as the policy stands, they would not be stopped to do anything.
Thank you.
So yeah, this next question, any thoughts and feelings around TAB numbers, new venues being allowed to establish? Nothing at this stage.
Well, if there was the new racing club in Cambridge, I think there would need to be some discussion about what facilities they could have, because the chances are that would become a larger public entity in terms of requiring TAB facilities. So I'm not too sure what would happen in that regard.
Mike.
Yeah, I'm not here to change anyone's mind, but personally, this is what I think. I think if we had control over allowing smokes or not allowing smokes, allowing vape shops, not allowing vape shops, a lot of people would get rid of them tomorrow because we can see they do harm. But we don't have control of that. The difference for me with this one is, and it might be the elephant in the room, I don't know, is personally I've got little time for these things. I think people should be doing other things with their family or friends, or not being locked in a room on a rainy day in front of a machine. But the dilemma is a moral one, in that a lot of people benefit as well from the money that comes out of this. Probably the government benefit the most because they get a whack of tax, not just the obvious of grants and that sort of thing, which many people in this district have benefit, and that is the dilemma. And there was a lot of data in there. And I cannot remember if there was data on actually how many people use this to how much harm there is in terms of stats. Yeah, for me, it's a no-brainer. If there was no positive for the community in terms of getting some cash out of this for projects that help kids and communities and families and wellbeing in Haura, it'd be a no-brainer. I'd just be saying no, get rid of the bloody things. I'd just like other people's views on this. Like, is that the elephant in the room, or am I totally off track?
I'm with you, Mike. I'm surprised it's not up there as an option, that we just simply don't have them. I'm totally with you. If you take a utilitarian look at this, the cost and the benefit, it's a no-brainer.
Andrew and then Marcus.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. That's definitely one of the, first of all, I'd like to say, I agree with Mike Montgomery earlier, the comment, this is an unbelievably comprehensive report, a very well researched and written. And I'm also like Mike, on first reading of this, you just say, why the hell have we got these things? It's not right. And look, to me, it's not so much the grants that are given to sports clubs and Puahui Hall Society and etc. But the fact that, I don't know, some people find this a legitimate way of enjoying themselves and their time. I don't. I can't think of anything much worse than sitting in front of a machine and seeing my money disappear. But it's kind of a bit big brotherish to say we're going to wipe it out altogether. I do absolutely agree with, I'd like to see minimum standards, absolute caps, all those sorts of things, a sinking lid to some degree. But yeah, I don't know if I'm certainly happy to listen to other people's views, but I'm not really there and just saying, no, it's gone. So yeah, that's me.
Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say no to them as well. But the reality is I look at the people who have benefited in our communities from that money, and some that I'm involved with. And if we said no to them in Waipa and people go to online gaming, we're going to see zero of that money returned to our community, which in some ways, I mean, yes, this is the devil you know and devil you don't. At least if we have rules and controls around it, and our community groups are getting benefits out of it, rather than saying cancelling it, the money goes online, offshore, and the money's actually gone from our community forever. And that's, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Rob, sorry.
Roger. Hello.
I called you Rob. Roger.
That's all right. I was going to introduce myself. Yeah. I've got to say that I'm probably one of the few that enjoys having a little tutu on the pokies. I do limit myself to well, Susan, thank you. But I do limit myself. But I'm also a person who has been a member of a number of organizations that if the facility of going to the pokies money wasn't there, they would have had a particularly hard challenge in existing. And I'm even talking about Destination Cambridge and the fact that the pokies money actually pays 50% of the costs of running the Cambridge Christmas Parade through the provision of money to provide the facilitator. What was interesting to me was the number of registered people that were seeking intervention on problem gambling, and also I've forgotten what my track was. Let me just get back onto track. But I was interested in the number of people that were not affected, but also when it came to COVID, the fact that gaming didn't cease because the facility was not available. It just moved elsewhere. So I don't actually think that in removing what is a social enablement, social facility, is actually going to hugely impact the level of gaming. So I would like to see the continuation of machines in our environment. I agree with having an absolute cap on them, and I certainly wouldn't like to see them increased. But of course, when you look at those people that have gone and been identified as problem gamblers, look how much our population in Waipa has increased over the years that we've been monitoring this. And yet, even given that huge increase that we've had, effectively, the percentage or the level of problem gambling has probably decreased. And I think that's a positive thing, and that perhaps the controls that are there are actually having an effect, and balancing that with the social good that it provides. I'm on the balance of retention.
Mike Pettit and then Claire.
Thanks for that, Roger. Actually, a lot of what you said was absolutely fair and reasonable. If I'm in business and it goes under, then my business closes, right? And if I go bankrupt, my business closes. But sort of like here, for whatever reasons, the pokies get taken away because you didn't meet licensing conditions, or the business goes bankrupt, or for whatever reason, then it's sort of that gets reallocated to, I don't know how, but it gets reallocated. Someone else gets it. I'm assuming someone else who must have a license. So, sorry? Yeah, but it doesn't go down because your business goes under. It just gets given to someone else. So, I mean, that whole sinking lid thing with some criteria based around if an establishment falls over, it doesn't stay at 3232. That business's machines disappear. And so, hey, if you're running your business, you're not at risk. You keep doing what you're doing. You want to relocate, you can relocate. It might be a bit of a happy medium of there may be no reduction over time, but at least if places don't exist, we don't just reallocate it.
Raise a relevant point there, which I'd like to ask. If there is a property that has a license for a number of machines, if the company that owns that property actually goes up for sale and a new company comes in to take over that property, is that fall under what Mike is suggesting, that the original company has gone bust, hence those licenses are not available to carry forward to a new operator? Because that would be part of the value that is actually being on the sale of that property.
So just straight off the bat, I just want to clarify one thing. The people who own the gaming machines are not the same people who own the venues. So those are two separate matters. But Carl can probably give you slightly, we do have an example of exactly what you're saying has happened in Te Awamutu. And basically, those gaming machines are allowed to stay. Someone else can pick up that license.
Yeah, so the policy is in relation to the venue. So alcohol licensing, for example, pubs and hotels change hands on a fairly regular basis. The machines are able to stay with that venue, provided that operator meets their central government licensing requirements.
Okay. Claire.
Yeah, look, it's been a great discussion, and I agree with most of it really. And it highlights the need for really good controls, that we don't have the power to ban them, so we've got to see how they're managed. And yeah, I'm not that convinced that the controls we have are effective. I mean, not what we have, but the ones that are available. I think some of the comments that were made I do wonder whether or not they are very effective. But on the other hand, there is an ongoing program to try and improve those. Yeah, and I think the policy that we have at the moment is trying to strike that balance, I think, with recognising the community benefits that are achieved and trying to minimise the harm that comes from people who caught up in that gambling cycle. So I don't know if there's anything more we can do with trying to strengthen those controls.
So there is to that, there's one final matter that is a bit of a control. So it sounds, just to be clear, it sounds like we're sort of happy with what we have, but there is potential for a couple of things that could lead to a sinking lid. But we're a bit torn on this. Is that right? We're a little bit torn on the sinking lid. So in terms of controlling where the venues are, we are currently not utilising all the regulations that we could. So for location in the current policy, it only refers to schools and kindergartens. Sorry, those might not be the exact words, but education facilities, basically. You're not allowed to adjoin education facilities. A school, a licensed early childhood centre. You could also, according to the Act, include places such as community facilities and places of worship. So those are places you cannot adjoin with a licensed venue. Is that something we'd like to explore, as possibly including some other locations that are sensitive?
You mean adjoining them? Is that the...
Yeah, so you can't locate a
anybody out?
venue next to...
Probably.
Adjoining sort of within a few metres sort of thing, is it? 20, 30 metres.
Next door.
Next to.
Depends on the definition of adjoining that is used.
Just to complicate that even further, when the majority of these premises hold alcohol licenses, there are similar controls within the local alcohol policy. So that wouldn't be inconsistent.
I don't see any benefit.
Okay, well, I think, I guess it's a really tough one, right? We're in this real moral conundrum, I suppose, but very acutely aware of the damage and the harm caused, as covered in your very comprehensive report, Mika. But I guess in our other agendas and other things, we actually benefit hugely from the funding and are able to make some really great things happen in our communities with that funding. So it's just a real moral conundrum, really, isn't it, that we're placed in this situation, and it's a tough one. I guess from my perspective, I'm reluctantly comfortable where we're at with the policy we do have. I'm somewhat comforted by the fact that we haven't got escalating numbers seeking interventions. That brings me some comfort. But yeah, I'm in the camp of I don't understand what the attraction is. I look at them, so it's just not my bag at all. Sorry, Roger. But that's my sort of 10 cents worth. Is there anybody here that really wants to make a case for proceeding with some kind of changed policy? Because we kind of have to keep moving on. I think we've talked it long and hard.
Through the chair, this is a workshop. So hey, what I'd like to ask, whatever committees this is coming to, is actually some historical data. There's 33 councils, I think it was, that have a sinking lid policy. I just want to get some data, because at some point we're making a final decision on this, of just, how that's built up, how it's gone from sort of 10 to 20 to 30, whatever. Because, is the curve like this and we're sort of behind the 8 ball, or is it just really quite flatlined? So at some point when you do present, it'd be quite nice to have that in the final summary.
There is actually included in the report a graph of exactly what you're talking about in the actual report. Sorry, I'm not sure what the number is for you. It is page 46. And it tracks the number of absolute caps, per capita caps, and sinking lid policies that have been implemented. Does that sort of?
Well,
I know. I do have a question in relation to the per capita limit. And I noticed that our per capita limit is across the whole of Waipa. And yet, if you look at the per capita figures from TA and Cambridge, they have approximately the same number of machines, which means that the per capita of machines for TA is far higher than the per capita number of machines for Cambridge. Does there need to be perhaps some consistency of machines per capita in the individual areas? Or are we happy that the per capita across the district enables the controls required?
So just to be clear, currently we do not have a per capita cap. We have an absolute cap. And if we did implement a per capita cap, whether it be just for Te Aomuru or for Cambridge, with the population projections, it's likely that we will get more gaming machines.
Right, gotcha. Happy with that answer.
Okay.
Let's leave that discussion where it sits. Good, thank you. I'm pleased that I asked the question now because your
one last question from Andrew across the
Yeah, thanks. Can I just clarify that if we decide to make any change in this policy that we have to consult?
Absolutely, yeah, point well made.
Yeah, so look, I'm kind of with you, Susan. I'm not in favour of these things, but they don't seem to be causing a huge amount of harm in Waipa as such, and I don't want to take Roger's guilty pleasure away from him at all.
Excellent. He's at least he's owned up. We won't tell Joe you take anything more than $20. Right. I think, have you got the steer you need from us? Ish, yes. Smiling. Yes, she has. Wonderful. As weird and wonderful as it was. Is there anything else you need? Otherwise, we will break for lunch.
Just a point of clarification. I just asked the question, if we don't change the policy, do we need to consult? And the response from Diana was that no, we don't. Correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thanks for that clarification. Great. Amazing work. Well done. It's a very excellent report. Thank you.
So we thought we'd start Miki off easy with the gambling policy. The next cab off the rank is the alcohol policy.